How's it going?
It's going really well, Jeffrey. Thanks for having me on.
Oh, it's such an honor to have you here. You've been such a pioneer for so long in so many areas. Why don't you take us back to how you first fell into this whole space?
Well, way back in the day, I was at the company that held Google's first servers when it was two guys and two computers.
Wow.
And they came to us and they said, "Hey, we can't buy T1 lines fast enough. Can we put our servers in your buildings?" And that was the birth of the co-location industry. I was a co-founder of the professional services part of that company. And I also had hit 300 pounds. I started getting brain fog, the kind of stuff that you just heard about with Poe and Arvind on the previous talk, inflammation based and a bunch of other stuff. There's some trauma and there are all kinds of things, and arthritis and all sorts of health things. And I felt like crap. I bought disability insurance in my mid 20s. You're not supposed to do that. And
Wow.
I ended up going to an anti-aging doctor, and he did this cool thing. He made a spreadsheet and said, "Hey, let's see what happens over time." And I'm like, wait a minute. I've been managing and teaching people how to manage millions of computers and network devices where you don't own them and you don't know what's inside them. They're all black boxes, but we can still do things. The body's a black box. It's going to be for a long time. So I can take hacking techniques and use them on myself. So first I spent 300,000, fixed myself, got my metabolism and my brain working. And then I spent a lot more, north of $1 million now, on basically becoming younger, smarter, faster, stronger, happier, maybe a little bit nicer than before. And that's been my path. And along the way, in addition to working in tech and computer security and ways of increasing performance of networks outside the body, I started really getting into how do we get signals off the body. One of my earliest conversations that got me going on this was with the guy who created 802.11b, the very first patent on Wi-Fi. We sat at Red Rock Coffee in Mountain View, California, and he was real excited. He turned his laptop around. He said, "Dave, I used the test gear that we used to look at the fields that are coming off of our networking equipment, and I turned it on my own body, and look at what I saw." And he shows me a picture that looks kind of like an Alex Gray painting. He's like, "I think there's data in here. We're going to be able to diagnose disease." That was 20 years ago.
Wow.
The data's real.
The data's totally real. Right now you're seeing it come out of MIT and all kinds of other places.
Yeah.
So let me ask you, what was your first device that you found personally impactful? What was it that really, aside from, the potential for wireless bouncing off our bodies to maybe give you some data, what was the thing that really was the aha moment for you where you're like, okay, yeah, this is a thing?
I bought an EEG machine back in, I think, 1996, 97, called the I'm forgetting its name now, something Junior, like Wave Exec Junior. It was this, 2-channel thing, but it had all the other traditional biofeedback stuff that you'd expect, like galvanic skin response and all. And I just fell in love with that to the point I have an EEG facility today where we build our own equipment. And I still remember this day, I'd done my first 10 sessions with very primitive equipment. And during the first session, this little 8-year-old kid, maybe 10, sees me in the waiting room, just starts screaming and running in a circle around me like 30 or 40 times. And I'm like, "Get me out of here." And I came in 6 weeks later and the same kid was there. I'm going, "Oh my God." And the kid walks up to me, sticks his hand out, goes, "Hi, my name's Bobby. Like, what's your name?" And I'm like, that's a different human. And I saw the transformative power of this stuff. And I started just talking about that on LinkedIn. I put yoga, meditation, and modafinil in my LinkedIn profile. You didn't do that way back in the 90s because if you meditated, you were clearly nuts. And what I found, 1 in 10 people who I was in meetings with, Silicon Valley venture capital tech meetings, afterwards they'd be like, "I saw your profile. Like, what's that modafinil stuff?" Or, "I do yoga too," or, "I meditate, but I don't want to tell anyone." So there was like this undercurrent. And it turns out it's been there for a long time. The founders of Google, Steve Jobs, they kind of dropped acid. Alternate states, abnormal states are also high performance states. Normal is boring. So like, just help me measure things and let me be abnormal in the best possible way.
That's pretty awesome. What was your first investment in the space?
Well, the first equity I had, I didn't have to write a check. I just invested a lot of time. It was in a company called Corventus, circa 2002, maybe 2003. It was I think it was a Kleiner Perkins or a Mayfield investment. And this was the first stick-on cardio monitor. It was meant to replace a Holter monitor. And I did all the architecture, everything that was not stuck to the body, how to get the signal off that onto the internet, into the cloud, onto a back-end processor so that we could diagnose cardiac stuff. And I did that as an advisor and consultant. And I didn't make a penny on it because like many med tech companies, it just ran into hard times because these are hard problems to solve.
Absolutely.
Also, it's because we have this issue. I was sitting in those meetings going, guys, where's the video game market for this? And they're going, what do you mean video game market? Like, we're trying to go into hospitals. I'm like, yeah, right, whatever. Payers, Med City, approvals. I'm like, you give me those things and let's hook it up to an Xbox and it's going to rock. And we're almost there.
The problem with right about that time, NASA was probably patenting the video game part of biofeedback.
Exactly.
Right?
But it's like seeing the future. I'm really good at that. I'm the first guy to sell anything over the internet. There wasn't a web browser or payment technology at the time, so it was less useful. So you got to see the future, but you also have to have a calendar on when it's going to happen. And as I've become older and hopefully wiser, I'm a little bit better at choosing directions and time. I'm always good at directions. I'm not always good at time.
What was the first thing that gave you a payday of any note?
From this space?
Yeah.
That's a tough call. Let's see. Do I have any exits that are specific to this versus CPG and the other biohacking, things like that? I don't know that I could tell you that I've made a lot as an investor in the space. Oh, here we go. I had some equity in Basis, the wristband company.
Yeah, sure.
So I was a co-founder and CTO of the U.S. entity that ended up getting acquired by Intel for $100 million. So that was a decent exit. $100 million is okay, but when you're looking at venture exits, you're really looking for north of that, substantially north, unless it was just a Series A acquisition. But at least by today's standards, that's not terribly amazing. But hey, it's better than going Chapter 11.
No, that's great. Where do you see technology-wise? Where is really the intersection between what we're talking about here from a trends tech standpoint and a biohacking standpoint in general? I mean, obviously, a lot of well-being has to do with the body. We've had a lot of devices and sensor talk and AI talk and stuff on the conference so far over these last couple of days. We're sort of in the home stretch, so a lot has gone before us. And there's so much that can be used to monitor glucose that can also be used for well-being implications, right? Where does that stand in your own mind? And since we're supposed to be talking about investments, where does it stand in your own mind in terms of evaluating where you put your money?
Okay.
Do you have percentages of, well, it's mostly quantified self stuff, less trans tech stuff, or, that type of thing as well would probably be interesting.
Well, I just realized I should have mentioned an exit. This last week, HapB, which is using small-shaped PEMFs on the brain that really work well, even on mice. So not a lot of placebo in mice. They just went public, so that was an exit. There you go. Right. It was just too recent to go into my database. And how do you really tell the difference between trans tech and quantified self? Like, where do you draw the line? I don't know that I can answer that without.
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I mean, for us, trans tech is really technology for well-being.
Got it. So I at probably the second quantified self conference, I still have the poster downstairs somewhere, maybe the third one. I spoke and I'm like, guys, some of you are kind of losers because you're gathering data like stamp collectors collect stamps. Now, you can't send anything with those stamps. You just put them in a box and look at them. And frankly, that is quantified self. And it's one of the many reasons that I created the biohacking community. It's a new word in English language. My name's in the dictionary. It's super cool. But this was from the desire to say the data by itself, unless you're an academic and a map maker and you wanted to understand something, that's not that valuable, and it's not valuable now. But what's valuable right now is hacking. And what hackers do is they hammer on a system to see how it changes in response to variables they send that way until they get what they're looking for. Now, that's what I've done for my own health, for my own well-being. So we have enough data and much better machine learning now. So data in and of itself now feeds our global instruction manual for the human body, which involves wellness. Because it's funny, people who feel well actually have more energy and they're healthier. There are other ways to feel well, though, like heroin, that probably aren't going to make you live longer, except it appears that heroin, if it's not cut with other drugs, probably also makes you live longer. So maybe that's not a true statement. So there's a chapter in my last anti-aging book about that. I'm not suggesting you use heroin. You can use naltrexone. Yeah, naltrexone is probably a better choice. But
this is not a recommendation to go find.
No, not at all. It's just one of those things where I have a harder and harder time looking at just wellness, because Jeffrey, what I learned over time is that I took over as president from an anti-aging group that meets in Palo Alto many, many years ago. It's where I learned a lot of this early day stuff. All the members were over 60, and some of them were over 80 and 90. And most of them had more energy than I did when I started on this path. But it was, I mean, you'd see miracles happening. I could never get anyone to go who was under 40. We were 4 minutes from Google's headquarters. The smart people all around us, no one cares. Because you know what people really care about when they wake up in the morning? They don't wake up and say, today I want to be well. No one ever said that unless they had chronic fatigue syndrome and fibromyalgia like I did. And even then, I woke up and said, today I want to kick ass. I know I'm not well, but wellness is table stakes. Like, I want to be better. And that encompasses, you know, the person says, I want to be the fastest in the world. I want to be the smartest in the world. I want to play poker until everyone else drops. And I've had people who use my work do that. Or I just want enough energy to commute 2 hours and go home and be a good mom or a good dad and not yell at my kids. That's control. So all of this, and I would argue all of the biohacking and all of the trans tech really falls into that. How do we give ourselves more control over our state? Whether it's our physical state, I don't want to hurt. I don't want to be fat. I don't want to be inflamed. I want to have a quality sex life. If things aren't working well down there, there's huge issues with that. Or I want to be enlightened. I mean, all of those things are ultimately come down to, I want control. I want my body to do what I want when I want. And there must be a way. Mm-hmm. So investing wise, I get to see everything. Oh, go ahead.
Go ahead. No, go ahead.
Okay. I get to see everything. People reach out every day. They send me bottles of stuff. They send me gear. Sometimes I'm like, what is this? I don't even remember. I don't think I talked to this guy. It appeared, which is an incredible gift. And what I've learned from 20 years of this is that there are incredible technologies out there that can do things you don't believe are real. About 90% of them have been created by people who are very many standard deviations away from normal. And they live in closets or their mom's basement or their own lab, but they are in love with what they do. And they invented a hammer and everything is a nail. In reality, to build a house, you need more than a hammer and nails. But it's really hard to work with founders who are so in love with their tech that they won't allow it to be commercialized. So mostly what I've learned is I look for a technology that is differentiated and is better than anything on the market. I didn't say cheaper. In my thing, I'm willing to pay more for better stuff. If it's cheaper, that's even better. And I look for a founder who genuinely is willing to take a deep breath and say, I'm going to work with a business team to make this thing successful, because that's the blocker. If most of the inventors listening to this, you have this great stuff and you're so afraid someone's going to steal it, and you should be. I mean, how many people have taken the idea for bulletproof coffee and done a crappy job of knocking it off? There's plenty, right? And none of them taste good, and most of them taste really bad or give you the shits. And that's fine because they didn't know how to do it. But it does put a weight on the R&D budget, right? It creates pressure. So if you have something really special and you have a patent, you still have to be able to pay for your patent. So there's this justifiable paranoia, and then there's ability to trust. And if I work to build trust with an entrepreneur, what I typically will do is I'll sit down and I'll get to know them a little bit. And if I think it's worthy, say, all right, let's put together a program to get you north of $1 million in revenue. We'll put you on Bulletproof Radio. We have 200 million downloads. It's in the top 100 podcasts on iTunes. We'll blog about it. And, maybe I'll even, do some promotional stuff for you. If it's the right business model, if you're there. But quite often it's just sitting down and saying, here's the path to get ready. Right. And then here's the type of investors that you're going to need. Here's the path for your company. Are you willing to do that? And sometimes it's yes. And sometimes it's greed, which means it's yes, but they're going to screw it up. And quite often it's, how do I know no one will steal it? And
Right.
what I learned in Silicon Valley before I got into quantified self and biohacking and all that, the best technology almost always loses to the one who can market. And that's why I decided to be good at marketing. That's why I decided to be a publicly visible person. Because if I make the best bulletproof coffee thing that actually makes people lose 1 million pounds, which it did, and no one knows about it, it doesn't matter. So if you're an inventor and you have something that you care about, you have to put it in many people's hands. Otherwise you didn't do your job. And it's that second part. If I see willingness to do that, then I'm more likely to write a check or bring in other people who can write checks.
I'm sure it doesn't surprise you that we've done the exact same thing on TransTech. My answer would be exactly the same as yours, right? Especially in the early days, there was all this amazing technology, but where were the business people, or where were even the people that could put it into design packaging that, could interest a business person enough to look at it, right?
Yeah.
And so we have been on that same journey every year. When we design the conference, we sort of try to identify, okay, what's the current major hole that these folks need to have filled. Hi there. How you doing?
This is my son, Alan. He might listen in. He does that sometimes.
Yeah.
Part of learning on the job. All right.
Good to meet you.
So
What about in our minutes remaining here? We've got about 10 minutes or so. What about the financials of the deals in this space? What do you look for? What do you look for in terms of, cap tables and the cap table structure even going in, right? What do you look to invest? Who do you bring on after you? Or, do you like to do subsequent rounds? And how do you like to do, all of the nitty gritty of more of the financial side for the people that are in the space and are savvy about that?
I tend to like earlier stage because frankly, until Bulletproof has an exit, it's hard for me to write, venture capital sized checks. In other words, I'm a small angel, but I'm a value added strategic angel. So I will do that early on. And then I'll do, pre-series A, I'll do series A, occasionally a little bit of series B, but generally that ties up cash for a long time and the returns aren't that amazing. So it's not impossible there, but generally what I'll do is I'll come in as an advisor and I'll say, yeah, give me some equity, but I have, other venture funds and other investors, and I can usually make a few introductions that bring in the right kind of venture capital dollars. And there's been a sea change in VCs where at the early days of this, no one would do it because investing in hardware sucks, but the cost of hardware has gone down. So people are more willing to do hardware than they were before. And there's a lot of VCs who actually acknowledge that biohacking or wellness have become investable categories. Now, 20 years ago, if it wasn't medtech, it didn't exist. Today, I shy away from deals where they say it's a straight medtech deal. Like, really? There's a reason that valuations are high there. It's because 90% of it goes into basically garbage, where regulatory compliance, trials that didn't need to be conducted, and basically making sure a bunch of attorneys and greedy government people are happy. That said, they get great valuations at the end, but it just takes too much money and time. So I'm like, do you have a consumer model? If you want to be medical, that's great, but sell it now and use the proceeds to become a profitable high growth company, and then license the tech to some big med tech company or get bought by one. But you don't have to start there. Like, those days are gone. So I really, really prefer a consumer facing model first. I also just fundamentally believe we all have a right to control our own biology. We should not need a permission slip to buy any device or any substance that exists on the planet if we're going to use it on ourselves. That's just, a fundamental human freedom.
What have you seen in the B2B space? B2C is certainly one aspect of all of this, but we've had a lot of people at the conference over the years. It's been a focus of ours for quite a while to make sure that a lot of these companies in the TransTech space are thinking, where their stuff fits into corporate quite early on, because you've got such long cycles that you have to slog through. You can't get to the end of, we don't feel like you can get to the end of the consumer thing and be like, okay, now let's think about corporate. Or you've got another X number of years ahead of you before anything ever actually makes it in there, right? What do you see?
It's a really interesting idea. A lot of it's around corporate wellness, but there's also just corporate performance. I'm exploring creating a VC right now that would require, or at least strongly request, that all of our founders go through 40 years of Zen. which is a cognitive enhancement 5-day program that I created with EEG and all sorts of stuff. All of my employees go through it, almost all of them anyway, in all of my portfolio outside of Bulletproof. And many of the Bulletproof execs in the early days have also gone through it until I hired a management team and became chairman and founder kind of role there. So the reason that that's interesting is I've seen other times where companies like Sleep Space, which is one of my investments around improving sleep quality with some real university metrics, or there's probably some with Happy. Time Shifter's another one where, look, if you're spending $100,000 a year on average for employees in a company that has a lot of thinking involved, and you spend an extra $300 a year, and you get your employees healthier, they will perform better. They'll be nicer to each other. Their quality of life at home improves. Your performance goes up. And corporate wellness in the early days was so disgusting. It was like, let's have some videos telling people to eat the wrong stuff. And there, we've checked the box and no one cared. But when you give them an Aura ring, another one of my investments, and an amazing like miracle of a device, just that they could fit it all in there. But when you look at that and you look at the ROI, that's corporate wellness. That's actually not corporate wellness. It's corporate performance enhancement.
Right.
And that's the other reason that all of my employees get a stipend to get things like Bulletproof coffee and nootropics and things. I'm like, you guys, you don't have to use it, but you can. And it's in all of our interests in the companies in order to do that. Everyone who works for me gets a True Dark set of glasses because their brains will be happier and then they'll be happier and I'll be happier. Like that's the perspective. I think it's happening. Everyone listening to this who has something that improves human performance ought to be talking to corporates, larger corporates, saying, look, I'm going to, of course, sell it to you for less than it would cost at retail, but you're going to buy a lot of it and you're going to see results. Give me a pilot project in one location and let's see what happens. And if you manage that well, that could keep your company afloat.
What's your favorite investment right now that you've got that you can talk about publicly? Because of course there's always some that are NDA'd out.
I am pretty excited about Levels, the CGM monitoring company. That's a very recent one. And I'm also pretty happy about Happy because they just did their IPO. But Levels, I was a little skeptical at first when I looked at it. But the reason that became interesting to me is that I have used CGM. I started sticking my fingers to check out my blood glucose back when the doctor told me vitamin C would kill me, and I was still 50 pounds overweight, like decades ago. And I would have sore fingers all the time. I didn't have diabetes. I was just showing him that it wasn't my blood sugar that made me feel like crap because it's mycotoxins. But that was a little bit of a longer conversation. So I just got tired of that. And then 3 years ago, I started doing just the normal Libre sensor. I was on Dr. Oz and he's like, what's that thing on your arm? And I'm like, that's my robot arm. Don't worry. It's got my Aura ring and my little sensor. But Levels came along and they actually made it more actionable for me. So my skepticism was you guys aren't making the sensor. But when I saw what their app did, the fact you don't make the sensor is better because it makes for a much more cost-effective business. And I was, I'm pretty happy with those guys. I haven't, we'll see what the numbers look like. And there's a few others that are pre-launched I'd like to talk about, but I don't think the CEOs would be happy if I did.
Yeah, I hear you. We all know plenty of those. Okay, a couple of minutes left. What haven't I asked you about that you think should be tossed into this conversation?
It's probably worth chatting about how to segment the categories here. I've thought a lot about this. And how do you think about it is oftentimes the most important thing that you can teach. And the way you think about this is there are technologies for monitoring that don't do that much. And you could say, well, most of those maybe are less valuable, except guess what? The Aura ring, and Aura is a company that is going to be, it's already extremely valuable. I think it's going to have a very powerful exit when it does because they're just so dominant in that space now because it's the best and because it's the best form factor.
Right.
And by the way, I love it when the best technology wins instead of the best marketing. To me, that's
me too.
Right. So you can, with enough just monitoring that provides feedback for behavior intervention, that's a category that's worth paying attention to. The ones that I have a particular interest in right now are real-time feedback versus basically long distance or delayed time feedback. So the delayed time thing is sleep. The real-time feedback is more CGM, heart rate variability, EEG. And there's such an explosion of what's going on there. I just talked with a guy named Gustav who started a company that makes a vagus nerve watch. And he's just figured out there's better algorithms. So there's an explosion of people saying, I could take cheap sensors and I can put together a device, but how I analyze the data, that's what's magic. The stuff that we're doing at 40 Years of Zen, we have our own algorithms for interpreting the signals that come off the brain and providing real-time feedback. So we're going to continue seeing people come out saying, oh, I'm doing, heart rate variability, and you can yawn, or you should look at it and say, do they actually have a noticeably better patent? Or even if it's not patented, if it's a trade secret and their signal is better and more useful provably, those are worthy investments right now. And then you have the other group of things, and I don't know how deep you guys get into that around, looking at the whole lab testing space. And some of the real-time feedback, like CGM, touches on that. But I'm also a huge fan of things like Viome, where you're looking at the genetic expression of stuff in your gut. The DNA company is another one. I'm an investor and advisor in both of those. The DNA company, Functional Genomics. These are long feedback, but these are more analytic lab sort of companies. I think we're going to see a lot more opportunities in that space. And the less regulation, the better in terms of getting your results. There's no reason that should be regulated.
Right. All right, great. Well, thanks so much, Dave. We really appreciate you dropping in and having a chat with us. This was really, really fantastic.
Well, thanks, Jeffrey. I'm super happy to be here. I'm really supportive of our community here. These are the people who are doing the stuff that is going to have more of an impact on human consciousness and on society than most other industries out there, and certainly more of a positive impact. And I would ask you guys, instead of following Google's early slogan, the "Don't be evil," your consciousness doesn't understand negatives. So all it will hear is "be evil."
The classic subconscious. Yeah.
Yep.
Right.
So be good, do good work, do good things for the good of humanity, and you'll win. That's how it works.